Some members of the United Nations Security Council are now calling for an urgent meeting to address President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Joining us now, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wolf.
So why make this announcement today?
Well, this has been 22 years in the making. If you go back and see that Congress actually passed the Jerusalem Embassy Act back in 1995, both parties, both sides of the aisle have come together. This is something that unites our country, and the fact that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, no one doubts that. Their parliament's there, their Supreme Court's there, their prime minister is there, and the United States has always put embassies in the capital. And so if you look at that, this is just common sense. This is just reality. What has happened in the past is every time presidents wanted to do this move, because every single leading presidential candidate has always said they're for moving the embassy. But every time that was presented to them, you had a lot of naysayers saying why it shouldn't happen. And they all said that it was going to hurt the peace process. Well, in 22 years, we haven't seen a peace process. Maybe if we do something different, we will now start to see something move forward. And so I think that's what the president did, is he showed courage, but more than that, he showed a commitment towards a peace process to go forward.
Does the Trump administration now consider, Ambassador, East Jerusalem as part of Israel?
If you notice, we didn't say anything about any part of Jerusalem. That's for the two sides to decide. That's not for the United States to decide. All we said was Jerusalem as a whole. In the peace process, however they decide to break it up or not break it up or decide east and west, that's between the two parties. And we're going to let them do that, and we're going to support them in that process.
Well, specifically, does the Trump administration now consider the old city of Jerusalem part of Israel?
You know, what they've said is Jerusalem is the capital. We are not going to weigh in anymore on that out of our commitment for the peace process. We don't want to pick a side on this. What we want to say is it is time, for the sake of Israeli children and Palestinian children, it is time for those two sides to come together. It's time for them to negotiate, and the United States is pushing that process. They get to decide the details. It's not for us to decide.
Well, if the U.S. moves the embassy to Jerusalem, I assume it'll be West Jerusalem. Does the U.S. government now differentiate between West and East Jerusalem?
You know, you're making an assumption on where it's going to go, and we just started that relocation process, so that's not something that we need to talk about. What we are talking about is the fact that this is a great way of moving things forward. For 22 years, we've seen everything be stale. The president finally said, let's get it done, and it's one more promise to the American public that he said he was going to do. 6 months ago, the Senate overwhelmingly on both sides said they wanted him to do it, and he's following through on the will of the American people. And I think that everyone will respect that. They understand that the United States is going to put their embassy in the capital. Why should Israel be any different than any other country in the world? And so that's what we did today. This is just a reality check. This is nothing that anybody didn't already know.
But it is significant, Ambassador, that you're not willing to say the old city of Jerusalem or East Jerusalem is part of Israel. You say that's still open to negotiation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Wolf, why would the United States say that? When we're pushing a peace process, that's really for the Palestinians and the Israelis to decide. If we decided that, we would be picking a side. There has been a lot of time and effort that's been put in by the administration to talk to both sides to bring them to the table. The last thing we're going to do is pick what we think should happen, because at the end of the day, Palestinians and Israelis need to live together and live in the situation that they settle together. This is not something the United States wants to do. We are fulfilling to the American public what we said we would do, and we're moving something forward that hasn't been done in 22 years. And this is about results, and this is about courage. And I'll remind you that when President Reagan made that famous speech that said, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall, all of the people around him told him it was a bad idea. Sometimes you have to take risks. Courage leads to leadership. Leadership leads to peace. And we have to go with the truth on it.
You say, Ambassador, you want the peace process to move forward. Now, the Palestinian chief negotiator, Saeb Erekat, says the U.S. can no longer play any role in the peace process. And he said, I'm quoting him now, President Trump just destroyed any policy of a two-state solution. Your reaction?
Anytime we make a decision, we get positive and negative reactions. That's going to happen. At the end of the day, the Palestinians, they need to make sure that we stop violence, we stop any sort of issues on both sides, Israelis and the Palestinians, and think about Palestinian children who want to know where their home is. Think about Israeli children who want to know where their home is. The peace process is not going to stop its negotiations. They are too far down the road to just break the process there. Palestinians want peace just as much as Israelis want peace. They are going to do this because tensions run high. That was expected, but it will pass. And when it passes, I hope that we can find peace and stability in that region of the world.
Does the announcement today by the president give tacit permission to the Israeli government to continue building in East Jerusalem? Some call it settlements in East Jerusalem. Where do you stand on that?
The U.S. was not talking about in any way settlements or anything else. This is just talking about the embassy being in the capital of Israel. That's all that this was talking about. We have long said that settlements are not a good idea. The Israelis are they're very familiar with us telling them that we don't think it's a good idea, especially when we're moving through this peace process. We're going to continue to say that.
The president also signed that waiver today that keeps the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. Every 6 months, every president going back to 1995, they've signed that waiver not to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, citing national security concerns. When the next deadline comes up in 6 months, will the president sign it again?
If the embassy is built, the president won't need to sign it. If the embassy is not built, he will need to sign the waiver. The waiver says that you have to, when you declare that site, it has to be up and running at that time. So we have to, obviously, a lot has to go into the plans, the architecture, the building, the construction side of it. When that happens, the president will gladly not sign the waiver anymore.
The Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who we're told opposed this decision, Secretary Mattis at the Defense Department apparently opposed it as well, Mike Pompeo at the CIA. That's what we're hearing. He didn't play much of a role in this critically important, very important historic announcement today. Why?
Who didn't play a role?
Rex Tillerson.
Well, he's in Europe, from what I understand, so that would be the case. But look, when the National Security Council comes together, everyone puts their opinion on the table. Everyone puts their views. The president's great at listening to everyone. And at the end of the day, he makes a decision. All of those advisors told President Reagan the same thing, that he shouldn't do it. At the end of the day, President Reagan made a decision. Today, President Trump made a decision. Now we need to move forward on that decision and hope that we can finally bring peace to that region of the world.
But in rejecting the recommendation, the advice of the Secretary of State, and you've heard all those reports, Ambassador, is this another sign that he may be on his way out?
No, I think what you're looking at is this is a president that doesn't want status quo. He looks at history, and if nothing has changed, he's not going to repeat the same decisions other presidents have made when you don't get a good solution out of it. So I think this is about a president who had the courage to say, you know what, we're going to try something different. He had the courage to say, I'm going to listen to the will of the American people, and he's moving the ball on that. And we're seeing the Palestinians and the Israelis come together to finally talk about a peace process. Let's hope that that happens.
Let me ask you one final question, because I know you got to run. The 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act passed the Senate 93-5. It passed the House of Representatives 374-37, overwhelmingly calling on the U.S. to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with that 6-month waiver provision included. The Russia sanctions bill that President Trump signed into law in August passed the Senate 98-2, passed the House of Representatives 419-3. Why haven't those sanctions been implemented?
I know that the State Department was moving forward on those sanctions, and from what I've heard, it is supposed to be in the process, so I haven't heard that those sanctions haven't moved forward. I know there was a delay initially, but as far as I know, those sanctions are going to be in place, and they're warranted.
They were passed overwhelmingly. We're told they have not yet been implemented. The delay keeps going on and on. We know the president strongly opposed that legislation. He reluctantly signed it into law because he knew he would not be able to override a veto. If he vetoed it, it wouldn't be overridden. Do you not know, Ambassador, whether or not those sanctions have actually been implemented?
You know, when I talked to, the last I heard from Secretary Tillerson, he said that they had finished what they needed to and they were going to be implemented. So obviously that's a question for Secretary Tillerson. I can tell you the president knows those have gone into effect. He supports it. He signed it. And so now we're moving forward. And we all know why those sanctions went into effect. It was clear that Russia needed to feel the impact of those. And I think that's going forward.
And do you support implementing those sanctions against Russia because of what it has done?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, I'll leave it on that note. Ambassador Nikki Haley, was kind of you to join us. Thanks very much on this very important day.
Okay, thank you, Wolf.
Lots to discuss with Thomas Friedman, the veteran journalist, author, and foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times and the author of the best-selling book. Thank you for being late, now out in paperback. Thanks, Tom, very much for joining us. In your new column, just posted at the New York Times, you write this: in nearly 30 years of covering United States foreign policy, I've never seen a president give up so much to so many for so little. Explain what you mean.
Well, it's very simple, Wolf. The question of the U.S. Embassy's location in Israel, whether we should move to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, has been the most sensitive real estate issue, basically, in American foreign policy for almost 70 years. Now, for us to give that away, to basically move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and to recognize that as Israel's capital, personally, I'm not against that in the right context. I'm not even against it now, Wolf, if we got something in return for it. What could we have gotten in return? Bibi Netanyahu wanted this desperately. He's in trouble politically at home. Trump could have come to him and said, Bibi, you want the embassy moved? That's really important for you. Here's what I want. I want you to announce a ban on any more settlements beyond the settlement blocks in the West Bank for two reasons. One, that will preserve the possibility of a two-state solution at maximum, and at a minimum, it'll preserve the possibility of separation between Israelis and Palestinians, so we won't have Israeli settlers living in densely populated Arab areas. Had Trump done that, had he done a deal, the art of the deal, not the art of the giveaway, here's what we would be in so much better situation. By the way, Palestinians then would have said, that's a fair trade-off. Arabs would have said, that's a fair trade-off. And Bibi even could have gone to his cabinet and said, look, I had to do this, but look what I got in return. Instead, Trump gave away one of the crown jewels of American foreign policy for free, probably for a sugar high to get this guy in Alabama elected and to pay off campaign donors and promises. That is pathetic, Wolf.
So you think he did it for political reasons?
Oh my gosh!
This could have been a bargaining chip.
He could have used this as a strategic bargaining chip. This is a guy who came into office saying everybody made bad deals. This deal, Wolf, this isn't a bad deal. This was no deal. He just gave this property away when he could have traded it for something that would have advanced the peace process and advanced the U.S. national interest, not the interest of his base, not the interest of his donors, not the interest of a senator in an evangelical state who wants to get elected. I'm talking about the U.S. national interest was completely abandoned here.
So does it end the possibility of what we call a two-state solution, Israel and a new state of Palestine next door?
I would never say it ends it. Who knows, what will come? Trump won't be president forever, and ultimately it matters what Israelis and Palestinians decide. But we had a grand opportunity to actually advance the peace process, to do something that would have been good for Israel, good for our Arab allies, and most of all, good for the American national interest. And Donald Trump gave it away for free.
Does it encourage the Israeli government to go ahead and build more settlements in controversial areas, including in East Jerusalem?
They're going to build in East Jerusalem. That's not going to stop. To me, Wolf, the issue is this, and you and I have covered this for so long. The chances of a two-state solution are shrinking all the time. The Palestinians already understand that about 5% of the West Bank is already going to go to Israel. That's where the vast majority of settlements are. What's at issue is Israel keeps going beyond that 5% and settling in more and more densely populated Palestinian areas. Once that gets far enough, the possibility of a two-state solution will be impossible. What's even worse, Wolf, if you care about Israel and the future of the Jewish state, any separation between Israelis and Palestinians will be possible. The president had a chance to use this issue of Jerusalem to leverage something really important. By the way, had he done it, Wolf, he could say, Barack Obama tried to do that for 8 years. He didn't get it, and I got it. Look, I satisfied the promise to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and I got a promise from Israelis to stop settling beyond the blocks. That would have been a political achievement, and it would have been a great achievement for the American national interest.
We were told that he was advised against this move by his top foreign policy and national security advisors, including the Secretary of State Tillerson, the Secretary of Defense Mattis, the CIA Director Mike Pompeo, but he still went ahead and did this. Why do you think he did this? I mean, if your national security advisors are telling you, you know what, do this down the road. I know you made a campaign commitment to do this. Don't do it now. It's only going to cause aggravation and potentially endanger Americans at various embassies.
I can't explain it other than raw, naked politics or sheer abject ignorance.
That's it. Tom Friedman from the New York Times, thanks very much for joining us.